So today we have Suzanne Kepple from the city of Sharon, and also Amanda Settelmaier from TriCOG, Turtle Creek TriCOG. And they're going to be sharing their experiences and perspectives about code enforcement. I think we all know that code enforcement is the first step in understanding and addressing blight in our communities. Without further ado, Suzanne, if you would, please let us know about what's going on in Sharon.
All right.
Great. Round of applause, please, for Suzanne. Oh, that too. Jeez, I'm so sorry.
Covered up all my stuff.
Gracious. Sorry.
All right, so I'm going to try to project my voice because I am very soft-spoken. So if you can't hear me, just raise your hand. So I'm Suzanne. I'm with the city of Sharon. I actually started out as a volunteer for the city of Sharon when we did our mapping initiative, which was basically, and I'll get into that a little more detail later, but ranking all the houses in Sharon based on the property condition. So then I was an intern with the community development department. Then the code director was like, why is this person sitting here? I could use her as one of my code officers. So he eventually just pulled me away from community development. I got into code for a couple years, basically went in and out of the city, and then came back as working with community development again, but also splitting my time between that and code enforcement because we really started to ramp up our demolitions. So they created a position where it was code enforcement was doing more of the research and the inspections, and then the community development side did all the funding stuff, made sure we made our deadlines, our timelines, where we could just keep those demos going. And then most recently, in February, I got the job for CDBG program manager. So at the time when Brian and Ashley were inviting me, I was still code officer, so I still was in that frame of mind of code enforcement, so that's why I wanted to stick with the code enforcement side of things, but also bring in a little bit of the community development stuff because we do partner a lot with both departments. So what I did was, my title was the Ultimate Blight Boot Camp. Basically, when we're going into code or you're just getting introduced in the code office, it is a blight boot camp. Like, this is the ultimate way to learn about blight. You get right into the thick of things. When I was especially doing the demos and the inspections, I was with the field officer. We went right into the houses. I saw how affected the houses were, how affected the neighborhoods was with just the overall blight in the area. So go ahead, Amanda. So for those who don't know where Sharon is, it's between Erie and Pittsburgh is probably the best way to describe it. It's right on the border of Ohio. I only live like maybe a couple minutes from the Ohio-PA border in Mercer County. It's right along Interstate 80. It's only like 3.8 square miles. And it's divided up into 4 wards. But if you know the area at all, Sharon is part of the whole Shenango Valley. We're all pretty like small towns, but the Shenango Valley in general is just a whole big community that we like to partner with and get involved with each other. And then also another, I guess, landmark is Youngstown, Ohio. If you don't know Sharon too much, we're just 30 minutes away from Youngstown. Go ahead. So just to get into what our start of our blight strategy looked like in the beginning, 2016, they formed a revitalization committee. Basically, it was all volunteer. They were trying to present ideas and recommendations to the leadership of the municipality to help further improve the city's neighborhoods. So one recommendation was a blight task force, and then something else I'll get into later was a vacant lot reclamation program. So when we have our demos, what happens to the lots afterwards. We don't want to create another form of blight. And then our 2018 was our sharing and mapping initiative, where I first kind of got started with the city. Again, I'll get more into that later, but this was a very high volume of volunteer effort on everybody's part, making sure we had all the partnerships involved so we could get an inventory of our housing stock. 2019, lots to love. So this is that vacant lot reclamation program. So we started in a small target area because the idea behind it is we didn't want to start in the more like the worst blighted area. We wanted something in the middle where we wouldn't want to like overwhelm ourselves. So that's where I'm going to go into more detail with that. And then we also got in 2019 a Blight technical assistance grant. So basically we got that from our data that we had in 2018, but we wanted to have some kind of plan. We needed help from a consultant to get it all together and have some kind of plan for later. And then it kind of got delayed a little bit with COVID, but we eventually, through all the volunteers that were on the board, we got a Blight plan adopted in 2020. And then later next year, we got a Blight remediation grant. Again, we had the Blight strategy plan and also all that data from before that helped us get those grants. That grant helped us with basically demolishing any vacant and unsafe structure. So that was a pocket of money that helped us along the way with that. And then in 2021, I'll talk about this more later, how we ramped up the demos, but we did about 148 properties we demolished in that year. This year is probably going to be about the similar range, and I'll tell you how we kind of got those numbers too. So in 2018, we had a sharing mapping initiative. It was with the Mercer County planning staff and then SHPO, the city of Sharon, and then all those volunteers, where we created an inventory of all the properties in Sharon through ArcGIS using Survey 123. So you can see here, it was about 5,200 properties total that we inventoried. It didn't include any lots or any commercial areas. That wasn't our main focus when we were doing that. But we still got a big group of people. I think we had like about 200 people in one day, did about, I would say about 3,000 or so properties in that day. And then the rest of the time, as the weeks before and after came, we got the about 5,200 total. I myself did probably about 300, and it was just interesting when you go see a house, you see what it looks like, take a picture of it, document the condition of it, and go to the next one. What does it look like? And then you start comparing the good neighborhood to the bad neighborhood. So I got to see a lot of like the differences between the neighborhood and what was more blighted, what wasn't. A lot of our volunteers, they lived in those neighborhoods. They had a understanding, they had the passion of, we want to make the neighborhood better, and this is a way to help the city and help everybody get to that point. So they just went house by house and took just a picture or two and the overall housing condition. So most of the houses were good. That's the blue there, about 64%. Fair was about 23%, so those were like not as nice, but they were still pretty good. We weren't really worried about that group of houses. What we really focused on was the apparently abandoned houses and then the poor houses. So apparently abandoned we had this whole criteria, and I think when we mentioned before in that earlier session was like, well, how did you define blight? And we did have training sessions to help our volunteers be like, this is a picture of what apparently abandoned looks like. This is what poor looks like. Giving them examples really helped them out. It was a whole variety of people and ages. We didn't have certain groups. We just, whoever wanted to come out was coming out. So the apparently abandoned was the ones where we focused a lot of our demos on. Like, were they at a stage where they need to be demoed, or could they be fixed later? I think a lot of them, they were just too far gone to be able to fix. And then right now we're kind of focusing on the poor houses where they could eventually get into apparently abandoned. So we want to stop that and see if we can get like our rehab program or somebody to get into that where we can fix it up so it doesn't become into that apparently abandoned. But there are houses where, like, we have different perspectives where it looks like it's poor, but it's actually apparently abandoned and needs to be demolished. But that's where our code enforcement comes into play, where I, as a volunteer, was just looking at the house from the front. I couldn't go onto the property and look on the inside or the back or anything like that. But as a code officer, I could go into the house, look on the inside. What was the different aspects, like the foundation, the utilities, stuff like that? What did that look like? And that was very helpful. So with our Blight strategy, so we received a grant from the PADCD for technical assistance provided by the Housing Alliance of Pennsylvania. So basically, volunteers, where we made this Blight Task Force group, worked with a consultant to complete our strategy plan. And out of all of that came about, I think, 5 main strategies that we wanted to focus on. The first one was prioritizing and demolishing the unsafe structures and prepare for reinvestment. So basically, using our data, going out and doing our inspections and getting rid of the houses that need to be gone. And then planning for reinvestment was basically, so yeah, we have all these lots that, what are we gonna do with them? We had to have a program that helped that and didn't have another form of blight. So the other ones were disqualification of negligent property owners from bidding at tax sale. Won't get into that too much. That's a bunch of time and effort and a bunch of legal stuff that gets involved in that, because as code we have to follow all these legal stuff and we have to give the owner opportunity to fix it, and so that's where we ran into issue with that. Arborization of a land bank. We do have a land bank, but it's not operating officially right now. So we're kind of relying on our Lots to Love program, which is our vacant lot reclamation program, where we partner with the redevelopment authority, who would act as our land bank with that stuff. So that's kind of still in the works with that. Working with the banks and nonprofit to provide financial financing for home rehabs. We do have a home rehab program in the community development department. It's a one-woman show. I think this quarter has about 10 applications right now. So our problem is like building our capacity, and I think branching out to work with the banks, work with nonprofits, so we can kind of help those people out where the homes that need rehab get rehab. We're not working like so slowly. And the other thing was, I think we did touch on a little bit, the tax abatement stuff. We haven't really gotten to that too much. Our main focus was the demos and what we were going to do after. So getting more into the code enforcement side of things, we had a condemnation strategy and a demolition strategy. Condemnation strategy was a block sweep. So if you're not really familiar with block sweeps, is say you're just in a little neighborhood and we just go street by street, block by block. You just go one house to the next. And we did our, like, a property condition. We looked at the utilities. So if the power was off, if the gas was off, the water was off, how long have they been off? Have they been off 6 months, 6 years? That kind of determines how deteriorated the property, like how does that affect the property. We also looked at the taxes, the garbage service, and the sewer, because a lot of them were, at least, if not heavily tax delinquent, more than 2 years. So with Mercer County, if you're usually more than 2 years tax delinquent, you go onto the tax sale and you start that whole process. So, and then there's some where it's like $20,000. Same thing, they kind of follow the same pattern as like garbage service and sewers. Like people haven't been paying either because they're dead or they just abandon it. So you kind of see a pattern if one thing is higher than and the other is as well. Same thing with the utilities. If one is off, usually the other ones are off for that reason. And like I led into before with the owners, like, are they dead? Are they out of state? Did they just completely abandon it because they moved and they were just done? Some live in Sharon or the area and they couldn't take on it anymore, so they just left it. Are they older? A lot of people, they lived in that house for a while and just some situation happened, they got older, they just decided to move and never come back. We do have instances where the house is foreclosed on by the bank, but the bank doesn't take it over. And then so the people don't think they own it anymore. So once we get them into court or have a conversation with them, they're like, well, we don't own it anymore. We're like, yeah, you do. The deed's still in your name. So on top of that whole thing with the foreclosure, they're still dealing with, okay, this house is still mine. I'm responsible for it. What am I going to do with it? So that's where we work a lot with the code office. And if the house does go into demolition, working on payment plans with them, because a lot of these people are lower income and we need to work with them. We can't just expect them to pay for the whole $5,000, $7,000 up front. So that leads into the demolition strategy. So we got our condemnation, we have all our inspections done, we have all our pictures documented. We've decided that this property needs to be on a demo list. So when we initially started with the whole Blight task force and everything, and they said, okay, you need to prioritize demos. Where was that money coming from? From the CDBG side of things, I can only provide so much money. We did get that grant for a little bit, but where else was the money coming from? So we had to prove to council and even like the whole city, yeah, you're gonna invest a lot more money into the demos. Here's what it's gonna look like. You're gonna demolish a property. Okay, what's gonna happen? Well, through our Lots to Love program, somebody's gonna take it as a lot and expand their property. So that was really helpful with our mapping initiative. We had the numbers and we had a program that we could rely on or just get going really and see what it could look like later. The two main things that I will point out with this demo strategy and even like the condemnation strategy is a consistent process and stay on your timelines. We had a very rigorous timeline schedule. You saw with 148 properties last year, we were doing 4 rounds of demo for each quarter, and it was between like 30 to 40 houses a quarter. So when I got split up in my position, the CD side of things was doing the demo. They had to take that out of their budget of CD and code and be like, okay, this person needs to fill this gap of being the demolition manager. We're not going to reach our timelines. In the beginning, I think they said, the consultant kind of told them was, it could take 10 years for all these houses to be gone. Then we finally figured out like, okay, it could take 3 to 5 years if you did it this way. By the time we're about done, so we're hoping to get all our houses done this year, it's like 3 years. So investing the money, the time, all that staff, into that really made a difference with us. And then I will also say a lot of documentation, especially when you're taking these people to court. Our district judge is very particular about you having all your stuff documented, or else he's going to throw it out. Plus, like, we want to do right by the owner, giving them the opportunity to fix it. I would say 90% of them don't even come to the table. They just ignore us. The rest of them we have to go cite, and probably about 5% of that. So, yeah, the remaining 5% come in and we figure something out, and then the other 5% they have warrants out, so you're never going to see them again. So yeah, the documentation is a big thing because we have to do it legally. We have to do it by our codes. If we don't do it that way, then we'd be in pretty big trouble. So. Okay. Sorry, I like to talk too much.
No, it's okay.
So just real quickly with the mapping initiative stuff, this is where all our data come from. So this was before, this is just our little Avenues neighborhood where I talked about them in the middle of the blight conditions. So you can see the blue is good, green is fair, yellow is poor, and red is apparently abandoned. So you can see, especially in this target area right here, a lot of red, a good chunk of yellow, and it was just taking over the blue and the green. And then you'll see in the after, look at all the green and the blue now. There's a couple red in there, but again, that was based on perspective. Those weren't really demo worthy at the time. So that's where we took a closer look with that. So getting into the lots to live program, the vacant lot reclamation, like I said, what do you do after a house is gone? So again, that same area is the same area, and I'll get to that in a little bit, but our programs were a sidelight program. Basically, if a neighbor wanted to take over that program, we would help them take over that program, and they would eventually get the deed. We had to learn a lot with that. We've made our own little handbook type thing. Adopt a lot is, so if somebody just wanted to take care of it, they didn't want to own it, they wanted to add a community garden, they wanted to do some kind of artwork, so that's what that program was. And then sponsor a lot where, again, they didn't want to take over it, they just wanted to cut it. So we got people, some of them even like on a stipend with our program, where they would just cut it throughout the summer and it would just be taken care of. So back with the map here, just our lot evaluation. You can see with the gray, so this was our highlighted target area. All the gray was the ones that are to be taken care of. Like, they're great. We don't have to worry about those anymore. And that was through the Lots to Love program. More of the blue, that was like, there might be some trash. There might be some other reason that, say there's like, oh, it's like 8 inches higher. The grass is 8 inches high or something like that. So that's why I got a little higher scale. And then like the darker green and the green, it was like a wooded area, or there was a lot of dumping going on. But most of those, especially down in here, that was mostly wooded area, and there was one dumping zone in there. So, but overall, it was a great thing to have, just to show everybody. So with the police department, like all of this with code have to have partnership with all our municipality departments. We did see a decrease in police phone calls in that Avenues area. There were less fire calls reported in the area as well. A lot of those houses that you guys probably know, those abandoned ones, those were the ones that were always catching fire. So with the tax department, sanitary or sewer department, and the garbage service, which is Tri-County, is we have a system where if they wanted like our rental license for the property or a zoning or building permit, then if they weren't current on their stuff, then they couldn't get the permit. So that kind of helped with either putting them on a payment plan or just paying it off. Also got a good account of the inventory for all those services to make sure they know what's going on. And then we also have a contractor registration program. Basically, when people are building, the contractor's registered, they're liable, they're insured, making sure it's all safety and everybody's accountable. more connections with the agencies. So the schools were a big thing. We've condemned houses because we had a report that the house wasn't very good, and the school contacted us, and we went into the house and we had to condemn it. So just different stuff like that. That's kind of more of the worst case scenario with that. We work with all social services, the elderly, housing, food, animals, children. We try to connect the people with all those resources. We are like the main hub for those resources because some people don't know we have them. And then the big thing I'll hit on too, because the Sharon Beautification Commission, they do a lot of litter cleanups. It started in 2006. My dad started all of that, and I've been a member since that time. So, and recently with COVID, we've worked with community service on every Monday night from the summer into the early fall. We do a cleanup in all the neighborhoods, and that really has seen a lot of positivity in the neighborhoods. They're actually seeing people care about the neighborhoods and picking up the trash, and we're getting all these people to come out too. That's great. Real quick on this, it's good to have a great database. We've used Access before, Microsoft Access, and it wasn't very user-friendly. It wasn't very customizable. We moved over to eProperty. Basically, I love it a whole lot better. You just got to find the right program to put all your stuff together, because if you don't have the right one, then it's just time-consuming. We didn't have the analytics that we wanted to report to council through Access software, so that was very helpful on that. And then the last thing I'm going to say, with our rentals and rental licensing, we have about 50% of our properties are rentals. This ordinance was in 2005 we started it, but we really didn't ramp up until recently because of staff capacity, because we didn't have our processes in place. And like I said, with the wards, we just had 4 wards, and each quarter we just went to each ward, and that's how we hit all that. I don't want to go into, I'm running out of time, but if you want to talk about all the rental stuff that we do, because after demos, rentals was our big priority, and that's what we're focusing on right now. So I'm trying to think. I think that was it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Man, I'll take care of this. You can have a seat
All
there.
right.
I'll push a button. It's the easiest thing I can do all day.
Very good. Well, thank you all for coming. We have such a nice crowd here. Thank you for caring about code enforcement. I know when we first started talking about code enforcement in our neck of the woods, somebody would say, oh, you gotta stop talking about code enforcement. It's boring. Nobody cares about code enforcement. So, X number of years later, I'm happy to be here.
Do we know where your presentation's
I
at?
do. I just saw it.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Go ahead, Amanda.
So, yes, so very quickly, I'm just
Thank
going to
you.
run through these slides real quickly, and if anybody has any questions afterwards, I'm very happy to form a relationship with you and
Thank you.
exchange information, because
Yep.
I'm sure I can learn just as much from you or more than you're going to learn from me. But you have some power hitters here today. There's Kim Graziani is here. If you don't know Kim yet, Ann Lewis is here
Yeah.
from the TriCOG Land Bank. I mean, you have some really knowledgeable people who see blight from a broader perspective. So fully take advantage of that. Next slide, please. So just 3 points I want to hit on today. Why is code enforcement important? Vacant and abandoned and deteriorating properties pose a health and safety hazard to communities. It's not just an eyesore, right? And we believe that strategic code enforcement is the first line of defense against these hazards, but towns are overwhelmed, have lack of capacity, especially small towns with limited resources, to have the tools that can better use tools like Act 90. Are you familiar? Who's familiar with Act 90? Act 90 is state legislation that allows you to deny permit to anyone who has code violations elsewhere. Really powerful tool if you have a slumlord or people wanting to buy property in your town that hasn't been a very good actor, but you only know that you have the information. So if we're not talking to each other and we can't communicate across municipal boundaries, it becomes less powerful. That's a state act, so the more people that communicate, the more powerful that act is. And last point is that technology, for one of the reasons I just stated, Act 90, is essential for increasing efficiency and effectiveness of workflows with code enforcement. Next slide, please. So back in 2010, Ann Lewis and I, she's the director of Steel River's COG, I'm the director of the Turtle Creek Valley Council of Governments. Just very quickly, we have 20-member municipalities. The Turtle Creek Valley COG has 20-member municipalities. We're like the Parkway East from Wilkinsburg all the way out through Plum. And Ann Lewis has a lot of them, 19 municipalities in the Mon Valley community. So we got to talking in 2010. As we said, blight is personal. We could feel it. We're wondering, we recognize that our towns don't have a lot of capacity to deal with it. What could we as COGs do? And at the same time, the state was getting ready to pass land banking legislation. So the first thing we did was a cost of blight study. We said, well, before we ask our elected officials to invest in one other thing with their limited resources, we better understand why. And what we found in our collective area is that we were losing about $247 million, whether it's municipal service lost tax revenue, lost property values, and so there was a significant cost to doing nothing. So again, blight is more than an eyesore, and there are tools that exist. You just need to build capacity around using those tools. So out of that, that initiative came the TriCOG Land Bank, which Ann Lewis is heading up, and we started down this path of trying to figure out a multi-municipal code enforcement solution for our towns. Recognizing that, I can't say it enough, that I think our elected officials often felt defeated. They felt that blight was just an eyesore. But there's a growing body of evidence that is telling us that it's more than that. It leads to health outcomes like hypertension, heart disease, diabetes, depression, stunted development in children through lead poisoning, violent crime and homicide, and premature mortality. The Pittsburgh Post-Gazette did a really interesting article on that premature mortality piece. So this is, Allegheny County just released their market value analysis last November. And I just wanted to show you this real quick. This is sort of mine and Ann's section of Allegheny County. And when you see the share of residential parcels in poor or worse condition, you can see that a lot of them are concentrated. And what we learned from our cost of blight study is that 60% of Allegheny County's blight outside of the city of Pittsburgh was concentrated in our area. And if you look at the map over here, again, this is our area, you can see that affordability at 50% of the county median is right here, the same place. And so even if people wanted to live elsewhere, all this brown area is totally inaccessible. So we have a concentration of poor people, not necessarily out of choice, but because that's where they have to live. So thinking about code enforcement, we reached out to our partners from Center for Community Progress through the Pennsylvania Housing Alliance, and what we learned and kept hearing over and over again is how essential technology is. So we set down this path. We started out with an access database, realized very quickly that that was not the right tool. We were fortunate to have the Western Pennsylvania Data Center, Bob Gradick there, hook us up with a team of students from CMU who came out and looked at and made recommendations. We ended up hiring one of those students, and we've been working with him ever since to build this software around code enforcement workflows for code enforcement officers for all of these reasons. Next slide, please. Okay, so here are the main functions, or what we wanted to achieve with our software. We have inspection checklists, correspondence management, finding that code enforcement officers, totally undervalued, right? You have to have so many skill sets to be a really good code enforcement officer. Not only do you have to understand the code and the legality behind the code, you have to be able to effectively communicate with people. You have to be politically savvy. Correspondence management, in my experience, has not been a strength because there's so much. paper and things involved with managing cases. So we made correspondence management a big piece of this. Reporting to elected officials we felt was huge, and that continues to evolve as we work with our member communities on reporting to them the information they need to see to understand value. Event tracking and reminders. So you go out in the field, you cite somebody, or send them a notice of violations, and you have to have this corrected in 30 days, whatever it is. 30 days go by, do you remember? Well, the system is going to give you a reminder, like, hey, remember 30 days ago you said you were going to follow up on this. Ways to track abandoned property flags and be able to communicate with the land bank to say, hey, here are some potential candidates. And data integration. So code enforcement officers don't have to waste their time updating ownership information, but that we're going to be able to pool that ownership information in on a regular, probably monthly basis. This slide just shows that each municipality has the ability to create customized checklists for inspections. Really was committed to developing these checklists because we recognized that a lot of our poor communities couldn't afford necessarily a code enforcement officer that had all the certifications. So we wanted to supply the support to them. We built in a lot of guidance. Like there's a lot of gray area in the International Property Maintenance Code. And we actually produced a document that lives on the COG website if you're interested in seeing that. But we tried to flesh out that gray area and determine how we were going to interpret that so that we were consistent. But even seasoned code enforcement officers told us they felt there was value in having checklists. This one, for each ordinance on the checklist, officers select not inspected, passed, or failed. They also have a section to add notes and photos. For failed ordinances, officers can also note the severity of each violation. Next slide, please. The case management section of Code Enforcement provides a centralized place to track violations, correspondence with property owners, upcoming events, citations, photos, documents, fees, and payments. This strengthens case documentation. As we were saying, when you go to the district judge, it's important to have a solid case because it stores everything in one central place and saves officers significant time because they no longer need to duplicate entry across multiple platforms. Additionally, multiple staff and elected officials can easily stay abreast of all activities and developments related to each case because they could have read-only access into this cloud-based system. And new officers coming in can seamlessly pick up from where officers left off. Next slide. So the user interface, I don't know if anybody's had experience developing software. I just want to, is it easy?
Depends.
Well, my
You're good at
experience,
it or you're not.
my experience is that it is not easy. It's not like paving a road where you get from point A to point B. You know, you make a change here and something else gets impacted over here. So anyway, it's an evolving thing. User interface is something now that we're focusing on to further streamline the functionality and create a really functional dashboard. This is another screenshot of the, oops.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. This is sort of how we've been thinking about user interface now, where you have a snapshot of the property profile, and you can see occupancy, code enforcement cases, all at a glance. We have a fabulous team of people that work on this. So this is an example of a report. What I've learned is that elected officials don't necessarily have the time or desire to look through, a 20-page report on each property. We do provide that, but we also provide a cover page that can give some aggregate data and some visuals. And there is also a mapping feature. So this map shows parcels color-coded by number of violations. An officer can click on a parcel and see specific information about those violations, including their status and their associated case. The officer can also see the owner mailing address, property usage, and parcel ID. And so these are just some of the benefits we think of having the software. And like a lot of softwares we found concentrates on parcel. We were very intentional to make it searchable by parcel and person just because of Act 90. So you would be able to see any person affiliated with any property. it's a little bit different than I think anything else on the market. Next slide, please. So the code enforcement service, we're doing code enforcement in 2 towns. And it's so important, as we've said here, but yes, historically, I think very undervalued work. And again, like I was just going to say again about all the skill sets that good code enforcement officers need. And I think elected officials can become frustrated because they don't necessarily understand the legal process. Like, these people have garbage. Tell them to get rid of their garbage. Get it done. Well, there's a legal process involved there, and the code enforcement officers have to follow that legal process. So all I'm saying is, before you get frustrated with your code enforcement officer, maybe have a conversation about where it's at in the legal process. And code enforcement is one tool in mitigating blight, and it has limitations. If there's no owner associated with the property, then you need a different tool, because code enforcement is not going to be effective there. So this is how we've been sort of trying to figure out our budget, and this has evolved over time. We started talking about this in 2008 when I first became director, and I think it was like 2014 we finally got a program in place, and it just keeps evolving, and I've made more mistakes and have learned, hopefully from those mistakes, but this is where we are at now in determining costs. So we try to figure out, and here's a mistake, big mistake I always make at the COG. I try and make it as cheap as humanly possible because I know our members can't afford it, but that's a mistake. Do the real costs. Do the real costs. We did a flat fee so the total expenses, 15% of that each town is paying. We took the remaining expenses and multiplied that by the percentage of total parcels in the program to come up with our costs. And our theory is that as more towns join, the cost per town decreases. Remember, if you want to go down the municipal, forming a multi-municipal code enforcement program, administrative support is important, and make sure you budget for that. Quality service begins with quality people, and so I know you have to invest in your people, you just have to. You can't not pay them or give them good benefits. You're going to get a lot of turnover, and for code enforcement especially, you want some stability. Start and keep talking about code enforcement with each other, with your neighbors, if this is something that you want to try and do. Again, it took us years of multiple conversations, so good for Brian for starting this conversation or continuing it in Westmoreland County. Just one other pet peeve. It's so fun to come to events like this and you get all these great ideas and then you run back and you're like, we're going to do this. The ordinance comes last. Think about everything it takes to put that program in place. How many staff people are you going to need? What's that going to cost? What kind of technology do you need to track, say, like a rental registry program? It's not, just really think it through, think about the cost, and then pass an ordinance that reflects what you've, concluded. And I have to say it, codification is important. Nobody likes to talk about codification. It's expensive, it's a pain, but it's important. And you should think about codifying your ordinance every now and again. I am done.
Yeah, are you good? Okay, great, perfect. Okay.
Thank you so much.
We're going to see that for you. So we are out of time, so we don't have a lot of time for questions. I do want to make 2 plugs, though, based on both of the conversations that Suzanne and Amanda offered us. Both, thank you very much, first of all. Thank you for sharing. The story that Amanda was sharing, Suzanne was sharing about, you have to understand what the problem is, doing an inventory and doing a plan. I'll make a pitch for my previous employer, the Westmoreland County Department of Planning and Development. 2 of our county planners are here. They can help you with that. So it's not like you have to go figure all this stuff out on your own. And then as it relates to Amanda's point about regional code enforcement, the Redevelopment Authority and Land Bank want to be partners in that. We know that we stand a greater chance of addressing this problem if we are helping at the front end of that problem. A lot of our communities can't hold on to code enforcement officers. We think we can help bridge that gap just the same way that Turtle Creek Valley did it, right? So we think we can help with that. So when I talked about what are the next pieces of conversation that we want to have, that might be one of them. We might be reaching out to you to talk about regional code enforcement in the county. So again, thank you to Suzanne and Amanda. I appreciate your time coming here. So another round of applause for presenters.